Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Console. In this episode, we're going to be learning Lua in 5 minutes. Believe it or not, I think it's going to take a little longer than 5 minutes, but that's the title of the post that we're going to be looking at today, and it's written by Tyler Neylon. This post actually led me to another website. It's one subset of the website, I guess you could say, called Learn X in Y Minutes. So this is one Lua specific tutorial of a whole bunch of tutorials that are available on this website, Learn X in Y Minutes, which I'll link to in the description as I usually do. I had absolutely zero experience with Lua prior to filming this video, but I was pleasantly surprised as to how easy Lua is to work with, how easy it was to learn, and after that I did a little bit of digging because I was kind of thinking, this is very similar to Python, which, obviously Python is also a very easy language to pick up very quickly. And so I was thinking, why would I need Lua if I can do the same thing in Python? It turns out Lua is way more performant than Python, which is why Lua is often used in gaming. So many gaming developers, I'm not a gaming developer, but many game developers do, in fact, learn and use Lua. So without further ado, let's jump right in and get learning Lua. So here's the tutorial we'll be looking at today. As I said, it's written by Tyler Neylon. It's part of the Learn X in Y Minutes series of videos, but he also has it hosted on his personal website. So as I said in the introduction, I'd never programmed in Lua before, so I'm just going to quickly install Lua on my Mac. Turns out brew install Lua works, and everything worked just fine. So in general, I'm going to try and skip ahead through many pieces. You can see I already covered the commenting part at the beginning of the tutorial. I'm going to try and only focus on the meaty parts here, so hopefully keep the video relatively short. But the first thing we did was define a number at 42, right? And immediately you can see there's no types, right? So I didn't have to define that was an integer or whatever. So that's one thing to note about Lua as you're going about learning programming language. I would say in general, when you're learning a new programming language, you need to watch out for things like this because it will make learning the programming language easier. So in this case, that was the first thing that popped into my head was, okay, well, I didn't have to specify a type. That means there's dynamic typing in this programming language. So right here, I'm playing around with nil, which is Lua's version of null. It's an object that doesn't exist or is undefined or whatever. You can see here, I'm also checking equality, which we end up doing a little bit later in the tutorial, but I was already getting to that point because I wanted to make sure that I could check against a nil pointer, if you will. One thing I didn't particularly like about the programming language is how they handled truthy and falsy, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the tutorial. Right now, I'm just going through, basic logic. You can see how to do greater than, less than, equals to. Not equals to is actually tilde equals, whereas typically it's, bang equals or whatever. Also, all variables are global by default. You have to use the keyword local in order to specify a local variable in Lua. So here's what I was just talking about with the truthy and falsy. You can see the comment with if not Boolean value, right? What he's pointing out here is that nil and false are falsy, but 0 and the empty string are truthy, which I know it's always hard to figure out how you're going to do these things in a programming language, but I feel like maybe it's because I've been programming a lot in Java lately. I feel like nil should not be false. That should crash something, right? And in general, I feel as though if you're referencing some sort of nil value, that's typically a bad sign, and that means something bad has happened in your programming language. I'm sure I'm going to get flamed online for saying that, but that's how I feel about it, at least. So here's how to do for loops. It's looking very similar to Python. It's just 1, 100, right? Will index you from 1 to 100 inclusive. So that is one thing to watch out, is that those ranges that you specify in the for loop are inclusive. So that in that case, that 1, 100 would include 1 and the number 100 as well. They also show you how to do negative countdown ranges right below that, which is very similar to Python as well. So right here, you can see that functions are first class citizens. They're higher. You can specify higher order functions, and also that anonymous functions are valid as well. These are both really, really good things, I think, in a programming language, because it opens up a lot more possibility to a programmer and tends to keep the code a lot cleaner, in my opinion. So right here, he starts talking about tables. Tables seem to me to be the primary data structure in Lua. They are very similar to dictionaries in Python, if you're familiar with those. What's interesting about Lua is you could think almost everything is a table, and there are functions acting on tables. In fact, the way you do object-oriented programming, which we'll see a little bit later, is you're using tables, and then you are overriding functionality on those tables, those various tables, and that gives you the illusion of object-oriented programming. So anyway, this part of the tutorial is basically just running through the idea of the table. Again, they're very similar to Python dictionaries, so if you're familiar with those, it should carry over nicely to Lua as well. So _G is what they're calling the global table in Lua, and what I'm doing right here is I'm just printing out everything that's in that _G table. You can see itself, _G is itself in the _G table, but it just looks like, you know, a bunch of functions and tables, which, like I said, it seems to me, at least, I'm not a Lua expert, but it seems to me like everything is a table, and then there are functions that act on these tables. Is kind of how Lua works behind the scenes. But you can see here almost like this is the known namespace of the Lua programming language, right? All of these functions kind of come built into the Lua programming language, and you're able to access them through this _G table effectively. Here's another thing I thought was kind of interesting is lists don't actually exist in Lua. A list is actually just a table itself. So he's pointing that out and showing you like kind of how you would iterate through a list in Lua. So this is when we're getting into this meta table stuff I was talking about before, which is effectively leading into object-oriented programming. Right here, he's showing you how to do overrides on a table itself, right? So you can see what he's saying here is like if you have F1 and F2 and they should, you know, symbolize fractions, if you will, you have no way of adding these fractions together. There's no functionality for adding fractions. And the way you would do that here is you create this function metafraction dot __ add that takes in two F1 and F2, and you call the set meta table on F1 and F2 with the metafraction function, and that provides Lua the ability to add two fractions together, if you will. Set meta table, if you look back at the previous section of the video, is one of the global functions, right? So that's one of the ones Lua comes pre-packaged with, but you're able to add various functionality to the global table, if you will, using the set meta table function right here. So effectively, he's showing you how to override tables such that you're providing the ability to add two fractions together as a toy example, right? You could do this with anything, with any sort of table, but in general, or specifically, he's showing you how to do it with fractions. So right here, we're finally getting into the object-oriented programming in Lua. You can see here, we're going to use the canonical dog example here, and we're going to create a new dog, and then we're going to call make sound on that new dog object. But again, what's interesting about Lua is it's really just a bunch of tables, and we're reusing that set meta table function that we had used previously to add the addition to two fractions, the addition functionality to two fractions. We're going to use the same function here in order to create a dog that can make sounds, right? So behind the hood, under the hood, that's basically what's happening here with Lua in object-oriented programming. Is it's really just a bunch of table operations, but it's abstracted away from the programmer, and with some clever naming, you know, using new and self and the colon operator, right? We're able to make it appear as though there's some object-orientedness going on here, but really it's just cleverness with tables, effectively. And no object-oriented programming tutorial will be complete without inheritance and the canonical loud dog example. So right here, what we're doing is we're creating a more specific version of our dog that we just created, called a loud dog, and using Lua's, the way I understand it is Lua is smart enough to go looking up the table of functionalities using that global table and the set meta table in order to find the appropriate method that it needs in order to make it appear as though there's some sort of polymorphism going on here, right? So this is how you would do polymorphism, but again, you're just taking advantage of Lua's cleverness with the tables and how it's able to look up functionality kind of up the chain of starting from your like more specific object. It will look up to the less specific object if it doesn't find the functionality that it finds for the loud dog that it needs, right? But again, it's all just table lookups effectively. So right here, Tyler is showing how to import and export functionality, which, no 5-minute tutorial would be complete without something like this. So right here, he's just packaging up a bunch of functionality into a side file, if you will, in order to import it into like a main function or a main package, if you will, and call some functionality from there. There's a couple of oddities he points out towards the end. I'm not going to get into those because I don't think they're that important to cover, but needless to say, you know now how to import and export code in order to keep your packages relatively cleaned up. That will do it for this week's episode of Console. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the little bell notification so you're made aware every time a new episode of Console is released. And they come out every week, so if you didn't like this episode, hopefully you'll like the last. You can also look up the playlist and play all the previous episodes. Hopefully there's something you like there as well. This was really fun for me. I really enjoy learning new programming languages. It's part of the reason why I created this series of videos, is because I'm always on the lookout for new stuff to play around with. I had absolutely no knowledge of Lua. I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I opened up the screen and started recording. I was kind of surprised to see how similar it was to Python. Given I'm not a game developer and I'm not too concerned with performance, I'm probably not going to make the switch away from Python. Like, if it does roughly the same things that Python can do, I'm more liable to just reach for Python because there's already a bunch of community around it, and Lua seems to be a little bit less popular, or a little bit more obscure, right? So I'm more likely to find solutions if I look something up on Stack Overflow or something like that using Python. That said, if I ever do come across a point in time where Python's not cutting it from a performance perspective, but I still need the dynamic typing and the scripting style of a programming language, at least now I'm aware that Lua exists, kind of what its use case is, and how easy it would be to switch from Python to Lua. So that's everything for this week. I will see you next week.